Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, and listeners, happy 2020.
Happy New Year, Bryce. How are you?
Great.
How's your 2020 so far?
So far, 3 days in, it's going good.
Oh, that's
How about
great.
you?
I have kept all of my New Year's resolutions so far.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yes, we're off to a great start.
I love our optimism for 2020.
Yeah, we'll go back and listen to this in like June or something and be like, oh man, just what were we thinking?
Those kids.
Yeah,
those
just so naive
kids.
It's January. It's the year 2020.
A new decade,
which seems really weird too. And today we thought would be, for the first Overdue Finds episode of 2020, we thought it'd be great to kind of crack back open that pop culture time capsule and take a look at the year 2000, which I know a lot of people probably said over the holiday break, like, oh my God, I can't believe that was 20 years ago. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, because I still can't believe that the year 2000 was 20 years ago now.
So today's episode will be all about helping you come to terms with the passage of time.
It really is, yeah. And really going through our notes here today and some of our questions, and it just really made me feel old.
Yeah.
And I know that a couple of our guests that we have on today, and for example, our first guest I'm going to introduce, Carol Ma, she let me know when we were coming over here. She was only like 7, I think, in that year. So I'm feeling really old here today. So Discovery and Cataloging Librarian Carol Ma, welcome to Overdue Finds for the first time. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. I'm an avid listener of the podcast, and I hope this isn't my last time. We'll see.
Same, Carol. I feel that every episode. And you are an avid listener, an avid tweeter about the podcast and other things, and I have to credit you for mentioning one of my favorite books, introducing it to me, which was Chop Suey Nation by Anne Huey. I talked about, I'm not going to go into it again, but if you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's a fantastic book.
Highly recommended. So check it out. I put my staff recommend sticker on it. So if you find my copy somewhere in EPL, know that it was just amazing.
Yeah.
So
I have a copy as well. I haven't read it yet, but based on Carol's recommendation, and I know obviously the recommendation came from you as well, I went out and just bought myself a copy and look forward to reading about it. Also joining us today for the first time, community librarian Cassidy Munro. Cassidy, welcome to Overdue Finds. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here, though I feel like I should also preface this with saying I was only 9 in the year 2000, so I hope that doesn't make you feel significantly older, but also when you asked me, I was like, oh, I wonder if they realized that I was a child still.
No, that's all right. You're both here today because I know that I work actually with both of you on various projects, and I always thought, you know what, Cassidy and Carol would be awesome guests on the show. So I think everybody's in for a real treat today as we look back at the year 2000, and it was really eye-opening doing some research for today's show.
Yeah, I was joking with you when we were setting this up that I was developing a couple hot takes about the year 2000, so hopefully I'll be able to share those today.
I've got a few of my own as well. So before we get into it, let's chat about some of our recent overdue finds. Cassidy, what have you been enjoying lately?
So, funny enough, I just finished reading one of probably my favorite book of 2019, but also a book by an author that I discovered right around the year 2000, so it was like a perfect tie-in. So it was Tamara Pierce's Tempests and Slaughter, which Carol's cheering, which makes me happy. I'm glad there's another Tamara Pierce fan in the room. This is a prequel to probably my favorite mini series. And if you don't know Tamara Pierce, she's written something like 30 books primarily in 2 different worlds, but the world that this one is set in, the Tortle universe, has the most. And it was most recently optioned for a mini-series, and I'm so excited. I know option doesn't mean it's going to be made into a mini-series, but there's been so much support online for it that I was like, please make me a TV show about this. But yeah, so Tempest and Slaughter is the newest book from her, with a sequel for it coming out in 2 years. and it's a prequel in some ways, and it's also one of the few books from her that has a male protagonist, which is really interesting, and I still really enjoyed it just as much as her other titles.
So is it a fantasy?
Yes, so it's pretty like high fantasy, but it's aimed at technically it's aimed at a young adult audience. That's sort of the demographic that Tamara Pierce writes in. Mm-hmm. But I've been reading them as an adult. These are books that I reread like every year probably, and having such a huge catalog, that usually takes up like a big chunk of my reading every year, which is funny, but I just really love them.
So interesting that you talk about it's being optioned into a miniseries, because I think like a lot of studios, I assume it's probably Netflix or HBO or something like that, has optioned it, and a lot of those studios they're looking for kind of that next big kind of Game of Thrones, Harry Potter franchise. So why not? Let's try it out, and hopefully it's a hit. It sounds really good.
Hopefully. And I mean, there's so many fans of it that I feel like even if it was horrible, it would probably have a huge viewership anyway. Yeah. So can't go wrong with that.
Carol, how about you? What have you been enjoying?
So my Overdue Find is an audiobook that I actually finished maybe a week or two ago, and I managed to grab it from our Express Titles collection. It's nonfiction. It's called Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. And it was just a lovely book to listen to because the author narrates the book and she has this great British accent. But it was a very frustrating book to listen to because it's about data collection and analysis and how that doesn't account for women and how that data gap has implications for women in daily life. And I was just listening to it and I got so infuriated. And I highly recommend it for anybody who does enjoy nonfiction, and it is available in our Express Titles collection, so you can finish listening to it within a week and return it. So I would recommend checking that one out.
So is it similar to last year we had Dr. Sophia Noble come in and do a presentation for us here at EPL, her book Algorithms of Oppression. Is it similar to that?
It's kind of similar in that it does talk about data and big data, but in Invisible Women, it is less about search engines and more about things like how domestic housework is not included in GDP calculations, and how women don't have pockets that can fit an iPhone or any sort of phone. So if you have a health tracking app, it doesn't accurately collect stats for women, and then all of the assumptions and the research from that doesn't actually account for women. So there are similarities, but I would say it is different enough that it's, yeah.
It sounds interesting. Absolutely. And I hear Cheryl, and this is a complaint by all women, but I hear Cheryl a lot of times just be like, oh, there's no pockets on this thing. So if she finds like a pair of pants that have like a somewhat decent pocket, she's always so excited about that.
Yeah, it's the joke around, oh, I love that outfit. Thanks, it's got pockets.
Yeah.
And I love that this, even though it's coming at it from a different lens or different perspective than the Dr. Sophia Noble book, just kind of breaking down these ideas that the default is neutral, that search engines are neutral, that data collection, it doesn't have gender bias involved. And it's like, well, it exists in the world, so it does. But that is a very provocative title. I was on board even before the author's first name was Caroline, and then I was just sold. So I will definitely be checking that one out.
Caroline, what have you been enjoying?
I just recently watched, for the first time, the mid-90s version of Little Women, the movie. There's a new version coming out. It will probably be in theaters. I think it has a wide release end of December, so it'll probably be in theaters. This is not another situation like with The Public, where we were trying to get it into Edmonton theaters, and it was so confusing. But it'll probably be out there. But this is the one from the 90s that stars Winona Ryder, Claire Danes. The cast actually is just incredible. Kirsten Dunst, Susan Sarandon, Christian Bale as Laurie, the love interest until he's not, and then he kind of is again. And it was just an interesting movie to see. I haven't seen too many films by Gillian Armstrong, who's the director, but she was really, again, centering the women, the little women of the title, in this world, and kind of showing what they were up against, what they were dealing with in terms of, living at the time of, I think it's the Civil War in the States. So, yeah.
I think I do remember that movie. Big shock. I was a teenager and that movie came out, and it didn't really appeal to me. I know, that's surprising. Teenage boy Bryce was like, that's really not a movie for me.
Given how many romantic comedies you've talked about on the podcast, I would not have been surprised if opening weekend, Medicine Hat, you were there.
I was not there. But I remember, I think it was actually a fairly decent-sized hit, too, when it came out, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was like getting to it's hard to say when peak Winona Ryder was, but this was around like the pre-Reality Bites era, and you can tell she's a star. Like, just on screen, she's just like radiating, and I think she was a big draw for that movie.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, how about you, Bryce?
Mine's obviously a lot different than everybody else's. Big shock, I know, for those regular listeners. One of the things that we talked about doing on this show, and maybe now it's 2020, maybe we'll do the episode this year, is I've wanted to do an episode on stand-up comedy and stand-up comedians. So recently on HBO, I saw a special from one of my favorite stand-up comedians that I don't think a lot of people know about. His name is Dan Soder, and the special is called Son of a Gary. Now, that unfortunately is not in our collection yet, but watch for it. I'm sure it'll be released on DVD. But one thing that people can listen to right now that is in our collection is he does have an album from 2016 called Not Special. And so basically Dan Soder, if you watch Billions, you've probably seen him on that show, but his comedy it's hilarious. He really speaks to me. He talks about how a lot of his comedy is kind of around how growing up he was an only child, so a lot of like 80s and 90s references in there. But yeah, he's a really funny comedian, and I think he's going to be one of those comedians that over the next couple of years, I think he's going to break big. So
you can get in right now.
Yeah, get in on the Dan Soder bandwagon right now before he really takes off. But yeah, you can actually stream his live album from us right away. So go check it out. It's called Not Special, and watch for his other new HBO special called Son of a Gary. And I will say too, Dan Soder, big pro wrestling fan, and does the best impression of Andre the Giant.
Question, are you Dan Soder?
I wish I was, because Dan Soder is way funnier than I am. But no, Dan Soder seems like me and him would probably be really good friends in real life.
Okay, well, maybe if we do the stand-up comedy episode, we could reach out to him.
Dan Soder is always welcome to come on. Absolutely.
That's how it happens. Let's get into talking about the year 2000. It's 20 years. You said this all the time. What else do you have to say about the year 2000 other than I can't believe it was 20 years ago?
Yeah, so I just also want to mention, too, that we've done a similar episode to this already. So if you go back into our archives and check out the 1969 Pop Culture Time Capsule episode. So we're going to follow a very similar format as that on this episode. So we're going to talk a little bit about current events. We'll talk about some of our favorite movies, TV, music, books that came out that year, and just really kind of do a deep dive look at that year. And it was kind of a strange year.
It really was a strange year, and I guess that's where we'll start with this, which is, what are some of the first things that come to mind for you when you think about the year 2000? Cassidy.
I feel like the first thing is obviously Y2K because it was so big, but I feel like at the time I had no concept of what Y2K was. It was just like another New Year's. You were waiting for it to happen. Adults around me were worried, and then nothing happened.
So
you were like, okay, what was Y2K? I have no idea. And this is like a bit of a tangent, but I always think of the zipper brand, YYZ, whenever I think of Y2K. Yeah. So I have this weird like correlation between zippers and Y2K in the year 2000 in my head. So that's the first thing. And then funny enough, like the second thing I thought of, and I was like, what? Like, what do I think of when the year 2000 comes up, was Razor scooters.
Mm-hmm. That was on there when I was researching. We have a question later on where we talk about like what was trendy in there, and Razor scooters, absolutely.
I just think it's so funny because we're talking all about like e-scooters now is this big thing, but like the year 2000 was the year that Razor scooters were huge, and I remember being so excited because I got one for Christmas. And I was like, yes, like I've made it now. I am the coolest kid. And I even had ones because we live where it is cold all of the time that you could take off the wheels and put little like sled things on it.
That is amazing.
And it was like the best thing ever. And then I stopped using it after like 6 months, so...
Typical kid thing. Get this awesome toy, play with it for a few months, and then it just collects dust in the corner.
Absolutely, yeah.
Carol, was there anything for you that really stood out? I joked around earlier that you were quite young when it turned 2000, but was there anything that you remember? Or?
I mean, Y2K, again, that's the big thing. Strangely enough, the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, this was the first time that I actually remember the Olympics, because I don't remember anything from Nagano. So the year 2000, they had the Summer Olympics in Sydney, and one event I really remember was the triathlon, because I think that was the first year that they did the triathlon, maybe not.
I think it might have been, and that was with Simon Whitfield.
Simon Whitfield won the gold medal.
Yeah.
And I just remember watching either in the news broadcast later that day, I probably didn't stay up for it, when he crossed the finish line and he ran past several people.
Yeah.
It blew my mind that somebody could swim and bike and run. Like, I can't do any of those well.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I really remember about the year 2000.
Yeah, also from that Olympics, Kathy Freeman was an Aboriginal Australian who was in the track and field events, and they were also held quite late because of them being held in the Southern Hemisphere. So it was into September before they were holding it, because it's technically winter down there. So.
Was there anything else that you really remember from the year 2000?
Yeah, I mean Y2K, like this was huge. We had stockpiled supplies. Like I mean that seems extreme now, and I have no idea how effective they would have been. It was probably like a little box with like some blankets and a bottle of water, but people were talking about like what was going to happen with where the computer is going to shut down, or were they going to rise up and take over everything. And it's funny thinking about that now, given how much more our lives are controlled by computers, and just this idea that if suddenly we lost all of our technology now, it was scary enough 20 years ago.
Yeah. Absolutely was. I remember being it might have been high school or junior high, and that whole idea of Y2K with the computers kind of having to reset and everything. I remember that was brought up might have been social studies or science or something along those lines. And it was scary because it was like all these nuclear weapons, they're tied to these big computers. And if these computers shut down, we don't know if these nukes are going to go off. The whole like financial system could collapse. So like for our younger listeners, like just maybe it's crazy to think about. There was really this like whole idea of that really we could be heading into like doomsday essentially once the clock struck midnight really on January 1st. Like I remember watching, I think it was CNN earlier that day when Australia was the first one to go into the year 2000, and it was like, okay, the fireworks are going off, no planes are falling out of the sky or anything. So I was like, okay, it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. But it was kind of scary at the time.
It was, and it was this weird mix of excitement and scary because people were still having big New Year's Eve parties. Yeah. They were celebrating like it's that there is. I feel like we need to give a nod to the controversy of, was this the last year of the millennium or the first year of the new millennium?
Great episode of Seinfeld.
That's how I was going to explain it.
Yeah.
But this idea of that, like, if you're counting out a decade, it includes, you start at 1 and go to 10. And so if this is 2000, it's technically still part of the old, but it's also flipped over into the new. And so people, like, there was this bigness about it. And that is why Will Smith decided to name his classic CD Millennium.
Couldn't blame him.
He saw a chance and he took it.
Yes, yeah. And so, it was about the Y2K, but also Will 2K.
I'd like the idea of possibly like people going back like centuries from now, looking at that and seeing Millennium and being like, maybe this is what people were calling it.
Yeah, like
this
turn
really
of the century. It's like, no, it was the Millennium. And I don't want to talk too much about Millennium because I could. But I think the year 1999 had been in the public consciousness around there. There was Prince's Party Like It's 1999 sampled on Will 2K. But, so it was like this milestone year. And as it clicks over into 2000, here's my first hot take. 2000 was kind of boring.
It was actually in doing research for this episode.
It was sandwiched between like exciting years, and I think that historically now with the lens of looking back on it, I think that it's kind of like filling up time until we get to 2001.
Yeah, no, I agree. There was a lot of stuff I was like, oh, didn't that come out in 2000? It's like, no, that was 2001. There was a lot of stuff like that, and even to like 1999. But one other world event that I think we have to mention as well is of course the big U.S. election with George W. Bush and Al Gore. So also too, if you forget, like everybody talks about how controversial obviously the 2016 election was, but the year 2001 was even more controversial. We once again saw like Al Gore on the Democratic side. He, I believe, won the popular vote, but because of the Electoral College, George W. Bush was elected, and there was a whole big controversy from, of course, Florida ruins it for everybody.
Remember hanging Chad jokes?
That's right.
Remember
you guys are really
So I just turned to Bryce for that one. But do you guys remember hanging Chad jokes?
None of this, and like even the Olympics, I'm like, what was I doing in the year 2000 that I had no awareness of any of this happening?
Yeah, but with that, I remember, so on The Daily Show, Jon Stewart had been calling it the lead up to the election Indecision 2000. And like on election night, because the winner was not known.
Yeah.
It was a while. And so I remember him coming out and being like, we didn't mean it literally, but it was wild.
Yeah, it seemed like it was a really turning of the page for like politics in that sort of way in the U.S. and kind of ushered in this craziness really that we have now. So if you go back and do some reading on that 2000 election because it was quite wild.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the pop culture that year, though, because there were some pretty big movies that came out in the year 2000. So the top grossing movie of 2000 was Mission Impossible 2, followed by Gladiator, which also won Best Picture that year, which was really cool.
Yep.
Castaway and What Women Want. I guess we'll start with you, Carol. Was there any other movies that came out that year that maybe stood out to you?
So a lot of these movies that came out that year, I didn't watch that year. I watched later on. So I think one of the big ones was Bring It On.
Yeah.
Because that was, it's such a cult teen flick now.
Yeah. Also starring Kirsten Dunst, who was in Little Women.
Yeah.
Right? So going full circle. I think another big one was Erin Brockovich.
Yeah.
So that actually came out, I think, late 2000.
Yeah, and Julia Roberts, of course, won Best Actress at the Academy Awards the following year, I believe.
Yes. And then I have a few more. There were a lot of martial arts films in the early 2000s. So in the year 2000 was when Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out. It was the first time I saw like Chinese people on the big screen. I didn't actually go see it in the big screen, but so that was really interesting, and I think paved the way for a lot of weird kung fu fighting jokes, but that's okay.
Yeah, the whole like aerial wire fighting.
Yeah, because the year before that, we also had The Matrix come out in 1999, and yeah, there was a lot of lots of spoofs on like The Matrix and Crouching Tiger, or Hidden Dragon, like for the next like 5 years, it seemed like.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was because I was old enough, I did go see Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon in the theaters. And yeah, that was, I think, probably one of the first movies I remember going to where it was just like all subtitles. It wasn't a movie where, like, obviously the fighting drew me in, but it was an amazing movie. And I think it opened up a lot of people's eyes to cinema from all around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that was one of the first, really international films that I remember seeing. So
yeah. Cassidy.
Well, I feel like when I was looking at like what movies came out this year, I thought a lot of movies came out this year that didn't.
Me too.
But then there was a lot of movies that did come out this year that I was like, what? And they didn't come up right away. Things like Miss Congeniality.
yes.
What? I hadn't even thought about that. And I actually remember watching it I actually remember seeing it in the year 2000 being like, what is this movie? This is amazing. But I don't think it was huge at the time when it came out. Like, I think it was like another one, kind of like Bring It On, that picked up that like cult status later. Emperor's New Groove. I'm a huge Disney fan. I feel like I have to talk about Emperor's New Groove. I think it's one of the most underrated Disney movies. And I have probably watched it 3 times since Disney Plus was launched.
I have watched it once, but that was a couple weeks ago, so I am ready for this conversation.
Yes, so The Emperor's New Groove. It's this like ridiculous movie, and it was such a departure from what Disney had been doing up till then. We'd kind of moved out of the like renaissance of Disney into the like sort of experimental. Atlantis had kind of recently flopped a few years previously, and they'd put a lot of money into Atlantis. If you ever want a really interesting deep dive into Disney, watch like some YouTube critiques or analysis of Atlantis, because it's fascinating. Yeah, but it had come out a few years previously and it basically flopped. And then they were like, well, let's just do this like really wacky llama movie. Why not? And I love it. It's amazing.
Yeah, I watched it for the first time in my whole life, not just since Disney Plus came out, but for the first time a couple weeks ago, and talked about it on the podcast right after Camila's syphilis book. That was a great transition.
Yeah, my favorite transition in the history of the show.
But it was very funny. It was I liked the elements of like the buddy road trip-esque thing. Patrick Warburton as like a henchman who you think might not be all that smart, but he actually is quite capable in surprising ways.
Yes, and like I remember like the first time I watched this movie, I don't think it was actually in the year 2000, but it was sometime after that. And even watching it now, like there's so many, I feel like, references that come out of that movie that people don't even realize come from that movie. Things like Pull the Lever Crunk and like Talking Squirrel, and like I just think there's a lot of things that have influenced future movies. Like I really think that if you look at Finding Nemo's Dory, I think that came a lot from the like Kronk henchman sort of character. I don't know. I think Emperor's New Groove everyone should watch it. If you haven't watched it, you should be watching it. But don't watch the TV series that they based it on, because it's awful.
It's based off of a TV series?
No, sorry. There's a TV series that like launched afterwards, like a Disney spin-off. Yeah. It's like Emperor's New School. And it's just bad. Don't watch it. Save yourself the time.
Yeah.
Caroline, was there any other movies that really stood out to you that year?
Almost Famous was a big deal for me. I was going through a very big Cameron Crowe phase at the time. I was, which every high schooler does, right? I legit, this is a true story, I had a picture of Cameron Crowe in my locker in high school. So Almost Famous came out, which was kind of a semi-autobiographical story of his experience being 15 and writing for a Rolling Stone magazine and following a rock band around. In real life, it was bands like Led Zeppelin. In the movie, it is the fictional Stillwater, but it was just a very sweet movie, a star turn for Kate Hudson, and that was a movie that meant a lot to me from 2000. I think what you were saying, Cassidy, about the movies, thinking movies were from 2000, but they weren't. I know that one of the movies we were excited to maybe talk about was Fast and the Furious.
I know.
Which debuts a year later, and then there are other ones, like if you had asked me, I would have put Miss Congeniality end of the 90s. So it's like this weird in-between year that I think is coming through.
It is. And I think, too, there's a lot of things that I thought came a lot later, too. Like, one that I was really surprised, and I saw it, so The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, just coming out of the holiday season, and I assumed, even though I knew better, that it was the animated one, but no, it was the live action with Jim Carrey, came out in the year 2000, but I assumed that came out in like 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
It's just a weird sort of year that we credit a lot of things to, but actually was kind of like, meh.
Yeah, and some of that might be for being the shorthand of the decade, because I think that, this was another thing that you may or may not remember, but we didn't know what to call the decade. We were coming out of the 90s, and then it's like, well, what is this? And I feel like what was landed on was like the aughts.
Yeah, that was odd.
But it never really caught on, so we just kind of say, oh yeah, the 2000s. And so it's like, oh, okay, 2005, 2000s, and maybe has like stuck with us where, What were you watching, Bryce?
I was watching a lot of really dark stuff.
Oh, good.
I realized when I was going through my list.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. One of my favorite movies, American Psycho, starring Christian Bale.
Also from Little Women.
That's right.
Everything ties to
This
Little
is all
Yeah,
coming
that's
back.
right.
connecting the little red string.
Yes, I'm that guy in the meme.
Unbreakable, starring Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, the M. Night Shyamalan movie, which, in my opinion, is his best movie.
Bold.
Yes. It was very underrated at the time. It didn't do as well as everybody was expecting because it was coming off of The Sixth Sense, which was released the year earlier, which was this gigantic blockbuster. Memento really put Christopher Nolan on the map and is one of my all-time favorite movies. And a movie that's so depressing that I could only watch it once, even though I know it's a great movie, Requiem for a Dream, also came out in the year 2000. You're both shaking your heads, and that's good because if you ever want to be traumatized, watch Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah.
I had a theory when that movie came out, and I watched it, that movie should be shown to high school kids to keep them off of drugs.
Yeah.
It would traumatize them. But you know what? I think it would have done a good job.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll have to revisit that idea. Maybe 2020 is a year where that idea's time has come.
Yeah, I just travel around to high schools, forcing teenagers to watch Requiem for a Dream,
Like,
scarring them for life.
Doing it Clockwork Orange style with their eyes pried open on there. But I think, I mean, 2000 was a weird year because there were these dark movies. There were like Bring It On and Requiem for a Dream. Like if someone is looking, if we put both of those in the time capsule that we're opening up today, it's like what's going on here? I think there was a lot happening.
It was.
Yeah, and I think that if we go from there over to music, I'm going to have to issue a warning, not our spoiler warning, but an earworm warning, because 2000 was catchy.
Yes.
It's kicked off with Eiffel 65's Blue Dabba Dee, which was the first number one song of the year in Canada. Well, Smooth by Santana featuring Rob Thomas was number one in the US. These songs were followed by other hits like Britney Spears' Oops, I Did It Again, NSYNC's It's Gonna Be Me, which lives on now as a delicious meme, and Faded by Soul Decision, which all reached number one in Canada. Be honest, were you making mixed CDs with these songs?
I feel like this is going to come down to us being young again, but I was not making mixed CDs yet at this age.
Yeah.
However, However, I do remember, like, this was the year when, like, Much Dance 2000 was, like, the biggest thing. And if you've never heard of the Much Dance, like, collections of, like, remixed top hits, and I feel like that's where a lot of, like, my music memories come from, is that album. So I wasn't making mixtapes necessarily, but I definitely was, like, listening to music. This was the year I got my first CD.
Ooh.
I remember that really clearly, and it was Britney Spears. It was Britney Spears, and I, like, just remember, like, the very, like, iconic cover and, like, being really excited about CDs.
Would have been the one that had "Oops, I Did It Again."
Yes,
on
yeah,
it.
which I can't remember the name of it now, but I can, like, picture the cover really clearly in my mind. And I can also remember my mom being like, "What is this CD? Like, we're going to go back to 8-tracks." And it's like, what the heck is this?
We're an 8-track family.
Yeah, like, that's what I remember. But yeah, so not making mixed CDs. Though I will say that I think another, like, really, like, crazy popular song, like, not, like, popular in that everyone wants to listen to it, but everyone's heard of it, came out this year that we forget about, which was "Who Let the Dogs Out." But I can't remember if it's Baja Boys or Baja Men.
It's men. It's men. Bryce and
a member
Caroline
of the band
said
comes
sadly.
in. We were men.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of the 1 and 2 hit wonders.
Yes.
We were going from we weren't in the digital single era yet. This is pre-YouTube. This is pre-iTunes. We're in kind of the Napster.
Yeah, we really are.
Era.
We're starting to, Napster's big.
Which we don't condone.
No.
LimeWire.
Kazaa.
Yeah, Kazaa, which, hey, if anybody's had Kazaa, that means you've had a virus on your computer.
So true.
Yeah.
But I have to make a confession. I honestly can't remember if I was making mixed CDs at this time earlier. When I was writing up the question, I had to stop and think, how was I consuming music in this time? And I think it was still primarily CDs. I know I was either about to branch into curating mixed CDs that spoke to my soul, but I might not have been there yet. It might have just been you put on an album and you listen to it all the way through.
That's what it was like for me, too. I remember this year, Cheryl and I, we bought first vehicle together.
Wow.
And I know, showing how old we are. Anyway, we bought a used vehicle, and in this vehicle had I thought I was balling because it had a 5-disc CD changer in the back.
Game changer.
It was a
Sweet
huge
ride.
game changer because I had gone from a crappy car with just a tape deck where I would have to put in my mixed cassettes to a 5-disc changer. So I'm like, I don't like this song. Flip it over. This CD is old school now. So I would flip it to another one. But yeah, the 5-disc changer in the vehicle. But it was mostly for me listening to, like, full CDs in this year, really.
Yeah. Carol, how about you? What were you listening to?
So I also was too young to make mixed CDs, but I'm sure my sister was. And fun tangent story, I was recently cleaning out my old room at my parents' place, and I found a bunch of old CDs from my sister, so I dropped them off, and we just decided to listen to them while we were baking, and it was such a throwback. Some of the albums or the songs that came out, I think in the year 2000 or at the very end of 1999.
Yeah.
Destiny's Child, Jumpin' Jumpin'.
Oh, yeah.
So we listened to that, not on that album, but on like top tracks or whatever album. S Club came out in the year 2000. And I love that.
So do I. Yeah, I think we all had a reaction, so we all know who S Club was. I'm pretty sure they are no longer a club.
I hope not. That would be a very sad club.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think they really succession planned for that one.
No.
But
there was a lot of bands like that around that time too. Like I have in my notes here, like All Saints.
Yes, All Saint is a 2-hit wonder, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise.
Cheryl and I joke around to this day about it because I was like, All Saints are going to be bigger than the Spice Girls. Ooh. I was all on board the All Saints bandwagon. They fizzled out a little bit, but I was like, those ladies have talent. They're going places.
Yeah, and I mean, Rob Thomas and Santana, that song, I reference that all the time, primarily in the summer whenever I start out with, man, it's a hot one. And then usually we'll then, attach a picture of Rob Thomas on the mic. But Matchbox 20 at the same time was
that
big.
That song with Santana and even like Bent by Matchbox 20, those songs were absolutely everywhere. Like you could not go into like a mall or pretty much any other place that actually played like music without hearing one of those two songs somewhere.
Yeah.
And I just want to quickly mention too, Cassidy, you mentioned the Much Dance CDs.
Yes.
And during that time, I remember getting so excited when those, like the Much Dance CDs were released, and also Big Shiny Tunes.
Yes.
Loved Big Shiny Tunes. I think actually I have like from when it started, like the first one up until probably like, I don't know, Big Shiny Tunes 12 maybe. I collected them like every year. Great albums.
I also want to give a shout out to the Now series, not the Now That's What I Call Music series, which is a different one, but this was the Canadian produced Now series, which was still releasing. And it was the same type of thing where it would just gather up, sometimes maybe not the most popular song by an artist from that year, but their second most popular song. And then so you have this kind of weird knowledge of like their deeper tracks.
It was such a Canadian thing. It's like, we won't give you the really big hit one.
Yeah.
We can afford this one. This second hit will be good enough for you.
Yeah. Carol, I think I cut you off with my S Club enthusiasm. Were there other things you were listening to?
I mean, I was only going to mention, I think, a couple more albums. But speaking of, Canadian deep cuts, Nelly Furtado, Whoa Nelly came out that year. And she had two or three big singles on that one. So I was listening to that again recently, and I'm like, oh, this feels like the 2000s.
Yes.
Well, and I think around that same time too, Nelly the rapper was also starting to get big. So you could quite easily get confused between Nelly Furtado and Nelly the rapper.
Yeah. Awkward situations coming from that.
When I was in St. Louis this past year for the Stanley Cup Finals, Nelly was in attendance at the game I was at. It was pretty awesome.
Which Nelly though, Bryce?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. See, there we go. The rapper Nelly. Yeah.
Okay. I was hoping this was like an exclusive where like Nelly Furtado was a huge St. Louis Blues fan around there. And I have to give a shout out to Faded by Soul Decision. I don't know if you've ever listened to their full album. I have listened to this album probably more times than anyone else in Canada, including members of Soul Decision and their family, because somehow my family, and this is going to tell you exactly how cool I am, which is very, but my family discovered that the length of the playing time of the Soul Decision album is exactly the amount of time it takes us to play a game of Scrabble. So whenever I am home, which is now usually at Christmas, and someone will say like, hey, let's play Scrabble. Great, I'll put the Scrabble CD on. It is Soul Decision. We listen to their full album and then end up humming, like, again, the deep cuts off the album, the ones that no one has ever heard. So if you ever have any questions about Soul Decision, please come to me.
Yes. Maybe we'll do a Soul Decision episode.
Oh, wow. I don't know if I can handle that.
We'll invite members of Soul Decision to come on.
It was an odd hit. It was an odd kind of like soft pop hit, and I think we were seeing that a lot as like it wasn't the initial kind of bubblegum spike of the late 90s with the initial kind of rushes of Backstreet Boys, Hanson, Britney Spears, but we were now kind of getting into the Christina Aguilera soul-tinged, songs were having like rap interludes in them, like Faded, or the Destiny's Child sound was really coming through, so... Yeah.
The rise of R&B.
Yeah.
So let's switch over to TV. Modern reality TV really kicked off in the year 2000 with shows like Who Wants to Marry a Multimillionaire, Survivor, and Big Brother, all debuting in the year 2000. What did you think of these shows when they came out? So, I don't know, Carol, Cassidy, do you remember any of those shows like Survivor or Big Brother?
I remember watching Survivor, like, not for the, like, drama of, like, interpersonal, but literally for the, like, team games that they had to play.
Oh, yeah.
It was like, that's all we would watch, and that was it. But I also remember watching a lot of Fear Factor around this time. And if you've never watched Fear Factor, we would watch this as a family while eating dinner, which was the worst. The worst decision.
There was always a bug challenge.
Yes, or they would have to eat
challenge?
like fermented things or like really gross things, and we'd be sitting, and my mom would be like, "Why are you doing this? This is awful." But I think that's part of like what I was watching in Survivor was that same sort of like challengey bit. Mm-hmm. But I have never heard of Who Wants to Marry a Multimillionaire, but now I want to watch it.
It was more of like a special.
Yeah, it was like
a mini series.
Yeah, it wasn't like a full on, like I want to say it was maybe like a handful of episodes, and it was really controversial at the time. And
because it turned out that the guys, they were pairing up a man and a woman, and it turned out the guy maybe wasn't as multi-millionaire as he was being advertised as. Not to be confused with Joe Millionaire, which was that was the whole premise of the show, which was they told the women he was a millionaire, but he really wasn't. He was just a regular guy, and so they wanted someone to fall in love with him and then see if she would stay.
that was almost like predecessor to The Bachelor.
Yeah.
This one wasn't.
Yeah, this was just like, let's take two strangers, pair them up, marry them on live television, I believe.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
It was weird.
And it was unsuccessful.
Yeah, I think if you look back at some of like the kind of the worst flops on TV or most controversial kind of trashy things that have happened, Who Wants to Marry a Multimillionaire is always up on that list.
And I think it kind of set people up to thinking of reality TV or so-called reality TV in those kind of trashy terms around it, whereas it had a lot to overcome. And I mean, Survivor and Big Brother are still on the air.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they lasted, as did, things like incarnations of The Amazing Race and reality TV. Like most forms of art or media, it didn't start in 2000 whole, like there had been MTV's The Real World or other things leading up to it, but it kind of got this sense of like, oh well, we'll put people on TV, we'll put them in situations, and it'll be entertaining. And sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to make the obvious point that this was before the social media that we all live in. Mm-hmm. So stars, I think, are more open in Instagram, Twitter, even like Facebook, in terms of sharing some of their lives and their house. And I know what The Rock eats on his cheat days because he posts it on Instagram. And it was a produced look at it. Like, they were only showing us what they wanted to show us, but the same can be said of Instagram. And so I think it was a nice kind of look into that world in a different way.
Mm-hmm. What was really interesting when I was reading about MTV Cribs is that a lot of the stuff they showed wasn't theirs. They would rent cars and add them to their collection. So the idea of, Instagram having a curated feed, it was already starting way back then. And again, as you were saying, they show what they want to show to portray a certain image.
Yeah, this peek behind. And I think as the decades after 2000 continued, we just started consuming more and more of that, where it became an expectation.
Just a couple of shows I want to give a quick shout out to before we move on. Freaks and Geeks, that ended in the year 2000. Such an underrated show. If you haven't seen Freaks and Geeks, go back and watch it. It's one of the best single season series that you can go watch. One other one, just quick shout out to CSI debuted, and that was a huge monster hit. We'd get countless spin-offs.
CSI.
Just really, I think that also kind of really helped jumpstart a lot of like true crime enthusiasm as well. And one of my favorite shows, still going strong, its new season premiere is, I think, like next week on HBO, Curb Your Enthusiasm. I always say it's like the R-rated Seinfeld. Love that show. So dark and so awkward and funny.
So one of the big stories in the publishing world was the creation of the New York Times bestseller list for children's books, which was created largely because of the dominance of the Harry Potter books from September 1999 to July of 2000. So we've talked a little bit in the past about Harry Potter on Overdue Finds, but Carol and Cassidy, What's your history with this series?
So Carol's pointing at the fact that I have a Harry Potter tattoo on my forearm, so it feels like this is probably an obvious thing that I can talk a lot about. I got the first Harry Potter book Christmas of 1998, so I was sort of like pre the like big rise of Harry Potter. At that point, the second one had already come out. They were popular, like you could find them everywhere, but they weren't crazy yet. And I loved them. I was so into these books. It was the first time I had read, because I was reading things like Tamara Pierce, but then I was also reading like Harlequin romances at this age because you run out of things to read. There wasn't a lot of like young adult, older, or I guess higher reading level juvenile fiction at the time. And then these books came out and they felt like they were heading in that direction. Like it felt like for the first time there was like a book series that was going to grow with me. And then they got crazy popular and things got insane and it was weird. And I just got like rolled into this craziness that is Harry Potter. And I remember, so like the first three came out and you could just pick them up like normal. And then the fourth one, which I think came out that year, the fourth one was like insanity. It was like, I lived in the country at the time, so I was living on an acreage. I wasn't in town, and I was like, I can remember being panicked about like, where am I going to get this book? How am I going to read it quickly? I want to know what's going to happen. And then I ended up begging my mom to drive me into the nearest city so that we could get the book as soon as possible. And she refused to go to like a midnight like launch, and I don't even know if they had them at that time, if it was still you waited till it opened. And I remember like reading the book from like when we got it in the morning until like 3 a.m. the next day, and then having to reread it because I couldn't remember anything that had happened.
Yeah.
So that was for the Goblet of Fire, right?
Yes, Goblet of Fire. And it was interesting because that's the first like larger, like page-wise, content-wise. We went from like, I think they're like 200-ish page books to like 400-page monster books. And the fourth one is one of the longest ones. But I also think that shifted juvenile publishing though, because all of a sudden other authors were realizing that there was an audience for juvenile fiction that was longer, that was maybe higher reading levels, higher interest, because up till then like there had been some, but you started turning to Harlequin romances or whatever you could get your hands on at the time.
Yeah, I think that is something interesting that I don't know if people talk about enough, which is that weird childhood age where you're reading kids' books, but also adult books and kind of anything you can get your hands on. And some of it you're learning about maybe at a really young age. Others you're just kind of like self-monitoring around like, oh, okay, I'm just going to ignore this happening and then keep reading.
I'm going to skip the next 15 pages until they're not naked anymore, and then I'll keep reading.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I think that's just such an interesting time in someone's reading life.
Yeah, and it was just interesting that that's when Harry Potter came out. And, like, I'll be honest, I talked about rereading some of my favorite books. I don't actually reread the Harry Potter books a lot because I find that it's harder for me to fall back into, like, what it meant for me at that time. And I think the Harry Potter books are so unique. This is something that I think as a librarian I get asked a lot is when is it appropriate to read Harry Potter with my kids? And the answer is variable because those books did grow with their readers.
Yeah.
And they're one of those series that, like, the first 3 or 4 are totally appropriate at one age, but you're not going to read book 7 with them because it's very different. So it's one of those ones that, like, the year 2000 for me was, like, tied to Harry Potter and the nostalgia around Harry Potter and the whole, like, Potter mania. I will say, like, I think the first movie came out the following year. The merchandise that existed for Harry Potter pre-movie is amazing, and I miss it so much. There was so much like artist created stuff that wasn't just movie stills, and I can remember having like really cool board games that were developed just off of what they had in the books. And I think there's a whole like area there that we've sort of lost when the movies got huge, of like merchandise and memorabilia and things that were pulled purely from like people's imagination around the books.
Even what the characters look like.
Yes,
yeah.
Or how to pronounce Hermione's name.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I never even, like, I was obviously in my early 20s.
Bryce was driving around with his 5 CDs.
Yes,
I was.
Yes.
No time for Harry Potter.
That's right. Such a baller back then. But yeah, I didn't realize that there was like merchandise for it pre-movie, because all the movie tie-in stuff, that's all I know of.
Yeah, there was some, I can remember having like beach towels and sheets and blankets, and it was all like, some of it was based off the different book illustrations, because as it got big, it started getting published different places. I also remember like when it got big in the States, the whole like controversy over changing the name from Philosopher's Stone to Sorcerer's Stone, and this was like my first, I think, realization that like the publishing world was bigger than I thought, and that sort of like cultural context mattered. So that was interesting too.
Yeah. Carol, was there anything that were you also a big Harry Potter fan? Or not really?
I was a big Harry Potter fan. I started reading Harry Potter in the year 2000. So I remember when Goblet of Fire came out, they had the 4-volume box set, and I wanted it for Christmas so badly, and my mother would not buy it for me. But I would borrow all of the books from my school library, and I would speed read through them and then give them to my sister, because it was so popular for her age group at that point where she couldn't get a hold of it in her school library. So it would get passed on from me to my sister and then to my brother, because he was the slowest reader. It was also just so different because I mean, now there's the joke or the 6th book, when it came out, everybody was like going online and saying, spoiler alert, like Dumbledore dies or whatever. And we didn't have that back in the year 2000. Maybe we did. I didn't, because I didn't know the far depths of the internet yet. So it was really interesting. I just remember all of the books always came out in the summer, and I was not working then because I was still very young, so I would just walk
you weren't working.
Well, I would just walk out to, Shoppers Drug Mart or whatever, and just pick up the book, and I didn't have to go to Chapters for it, though I really wanted to. And then I would just spend the entire day, finish the book, and then just leave it on my sister's bed, and it would just get passed along in our family for that. So I do have really good memories of Harry Potter. I do reread one book every Christmas, and I've been trying to convince my husband to read them. He did not like the Harry Potter series. He never gave them a try. I don't know why I married him.
Is he indifferent or dislikes them?
He's indifferent.
Okay.
Caroline, was there any other books that really stood out to you that year?
I was looking at what was published this year, and more than any title, authors stood out. Ones that I tend to think of as like institutions, which that is a whole other episode we could unpack around that. But things like authors like John Grisham, Danielle Steele, people who were producing...
Tom Clancy.
Yeah, people producing like one or more books a year, and then just like living on the bestseller charts. There wasn't the same diversity. There wasn't a variety of smaller publishers that were really breaking through. It was just kind of like the books that you saw at, your grandparents' house.
Yeah. You'd see them at supermarkets, in the magazine stand,
exactly.
Pretty much everywhere. Yeah.
I did want to say, however, that 2000 marked the end of one of the best-selling series of all time, The Babysitter's Club.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about The Babysitter's Club much in a while. You probably saw that and you're like, yes.
I had to double check because I was not sure. So the series started in 1986 with Christie's Great Idea, which has now been reimagined into a graphic novel. Raina Telgemeier, who came up a lot on our kids episode when we talked about that. But Christie's Great Idea was in 1986, and then over the next 14 years there were spin-off series, there were super specials where they go on vacations,
there were mysteries,
there were super mysteries, there are mysteries and super mysteries.
So quickly, what's the difference between a mystery and a super mystery? What makes a mystery super?
Length.
Okay.
I think it's probably about like 3 or 4 more chapters.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's longer, and there's often multiple narrators, whereas a mystery will just have one key focus on there. But this was, the main canon of Babysitter's Club had already ended, so we're now into the Friends Forever series, which, I mean, some people may or may not acknowledge this as a canonical part of Babysitter's Club? I do. And so in the fall of 2000, there was Friends Forever graduation day, where they finally graduate from middle school.
Oh, big day.
Yes.
I mean, after being in middle school for 14 years.
For 14 years, which was great because they were only 13.
Right.
So...
Oh, but Claudia didn't graduate.
Well, Claudia faced a lot of challenges. Mm-hmm. And is a very interesting character who's now being looked at. There have been a number of zines and art projects online that is looking at Claudia Kishi as an Asian American character in children's books at a time when there were not a lot of them. So I think we will see more Claudia discourse coming out in the near future.
Well, clearly we know we have a guest who can join us for probably
Please
the
have me
eventual
Oh, yes.
Babysitters Club episode.
Yeah. Bryce, before we get into our roundtable questions, can you let everyone know what we'll be chatting about on our next episode, which will be coming out on Friday, January 17th?
More like who we'll be chatting with.
Ooh, nicely done.
On our next episode, because we have one of our biggest guests ever that we'll be getting to interview. So on our next episode, Caroline and I, we're going to be talking with EPL's first forward-thinking speaker series Speaker of the Year, Mayor Don Iveson.
It's pretty exciting.
We are. I'm really excited for this one. This is going to be taking place before his event with us on January 30th called Building a City for 2 Million People. And we'll be asking him all about his vision for Edmonton, for the Edmonton of tomorrow. And we might even sneak in a few pop culture questions for him.
I don't think it would be an Overdue Finds episode if we didn't find a way to sneak something in.
Nor me bringing up Mayor Diamond Joe Quimby to Mayor Don Iveson. I'm so excited for this.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really great. It's going to be really great for us to talk with him on the podcast, and then for the event that's coming up for the public as well.
That's right. Mentioned it's on Thursday, January the 30th. Tickets start at $10 and go to epl.ca/speaker series to grab your tickets. I know we've got a few left. The event will definitely sell out, so we hope to see you there. I'll be there at the event too.
Great. So we'll go into our first quick roundtable question. Is there a fad or trend from 2000 that you would like to see return to popularity?
I would like to see "Was Up" return, but just as like a meme. I don't want to actually people to be phoning me and doing that, but I feel like somehow it got lost in the like meme opportunities.
Yes.
And I want it to come back.
It can almost seem like a TikTok thing.
Yes.
I could
that
see
would
that
be
coming back. Yeah.
We should make it a thing on TikTok because this is how I get cred with some of the youth that I work with is that I make TikToks and then hope that they think I'm cool, which tells you how cool I am.
So you could be the one that brings.
Yeah.
I should, okay.
Yeah,
I'll put that on my
2020 is the
to-do
year.
list. That's,
Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, send emails, finish report, bring back "Was Up."
Yeah.
I think that should be your to-do
It should be
list.
on there,
Connecting with the youth of Edmonton.
Yes.
One was up at a time. Carol, how about you?
So one of my probably most visited websites of 2000 was Neopets. And I love that they don't know.
Yeah, this is the tables have turned.
Yeah, they have, finally.
Okay, well, Cassidy knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes, and it's funny because I had as my like what are the top fads, and mine was Up and then Neopets.
Neopets, were they like the little like egg thing that you carried around with you?
No, that
that
was
was Tamagotchi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Neopets, you could have up to, I think, 4 pets online, and you would like take them around and you could play games and win them food, or you would have to feed them. You could build a house for them.
But they only existed online.
Yes.
Only existed online, but I think McDonald's probably had a Neopets toy
like tie-in
line.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Caroline, what fad would you love to see come back?
I really, really, really want another pair of mod robes. I don't know if you remember these pants. They were just like linen pants. The only way I can describe it is like the buckle on a life jacket where it clicks in. And that's what the belt was. They were the most comfortable pants I've ever owned in my life, and I want them to come back.
You're like, if it was socially acceptable, I would wear them.
Yeah, well, even if it was not, even if I just had a pair anymore that fit, there's a better than decent chance there's still a pair in like my childhood bedroom. I'm not saying I could fit into those anymore. Bryce?
So one of the things that really stood out to me from the year 2000 was the rise of DVDs.
Yeah.
Just huge. Now, people still today, you can borrow DVDs from us here. But for the most part, like if you recall back in like early 2000s, DVDs were sold everywhere and they were like super expensive. And I don't think DVDs should be expensive, but I would like to see kind of the notion of owning physical media be brought back.
Such an interesting. We could do. I mean, we've listed a whole bunch of things, but we could do a whole episode on that, on formats and the idea of ownership and how do you build a library if you don't own material anymore. So
and licensing,
yes,
because that's a huge part for what we do or what I do in my job, working with the collection librarians. So.
It's interesting stuff. Go out and buy some physical media, people. All right. So, what were you doing in the year 2000? Cassidy.
Okay, so we already mentioned Neopets, but I feel like part of Neopets is in the year 2000, I discovered the internet, essentially. And part of having a Neopets account is you needed to have an email. And you may know that you need to be 12 years of age or older to have an email, and I was not 12 years of age or older. And so in the year 2000, I was lying about my age so that I could register for a Hotmail account.
Carol, how about you?
During the year 2000, I was reading, I started Harry Potter, I was reading The Babysitter's Club, I was watching a lot of Sailor Moon, which I still love, and I think we do have DVDs of Sailor Moon at the library. I don't know if you've heard of this format before, where you would watch like half a movie and then you'd have to take out the disc and put in disc 2. Oh. So this was a lot of how I consumed my media back then, because it was bootleg from Hong Kong, because it would have, Chinese subtitles for my parents and for some of our family members to watch. So I was watching Sailor Moon in the original Japanese dub with Chinese subtitles.
Yeah.
And just trying to piece everything together, and it was very difficult for my little 7 or 8 year old brain.
Caroline, how about you?
I was reluctantly learning how to drive. I was not excited about it at all. Yeah, stressing out about the idea of leaving to go to university. I grew up in a very small town and knew that it was going to be a big change, and so I thought that the best way to deal with that was to start stressing out about it several years in advance. Hard to say whether that paid off or not. Yeah, that's what I was doing. How about you, Bryce?
2000 was a big year for me. I graduated college that year. I started my career. I know, my very first job out of school, I was still living in Medicine Hat. I was working for their newspaper there in their advertising department.
And for more on that, you can listen to the Jana Pruden episode.
Go back in our archives, listen to our true crime episode. Jana Pruden was also working at the Medicine Hat News at the time. She was a reporter, obviously, but different departments. But yeah, 2000 was a big year. Now, obviously, today we talked about the year 2000. For our next Pop Culture Time Capsule episode, what year do you think we should crack open? Cassidy.
I have been seeing so much media being created around the 80s that I feel like it would be really interesting to sort of crack open what was actually happening in the 80s versus what we are now perceiving to be the 80s. I don't know if you've watched the Ghostbusters trailer that came out a few weeks ago, but it is firmly in that same Stranger Things 80s sort of aesthetic. So I'd be really interested to sort of hear what, as we've learned today, what we thought happened in the year 2000 did not actually happen in the year 2000. So what did we think was actually happening in the 80s versus what we're perceiving to happen in the 80s?
Carol?
That would be really interesting. I picked something a little bit more recent than the 80s. And this is a weird pick. I really loved the year 2002. Okay. And there's a song it was playing on the radio over this past summer, and it's called 2002, and the chorus is just a compilation of all of the hit one-liners from a lot of songs that came out in 2002. So there's that, but it's also the year that The Bachelor started, and I know we have a lot of people at EPL who would love to be on a podcast episode for that.
A lot of people who work with Bryce.
A lot of people.
A lot of people.
Marina, Gina, lots of people.
Yeah. There was also a lot of other big movies. The Lord of the Rings was kind of in the middle of releasing their trilogy. A Walk to Remember, American Idol started, Degrassi started, so this was our first exposure to Drake as Jimmy
Brooks.
Yeah, Jimmy Brooks.
He was going by Aubrey Graham at the time.
Oh, interesting.
Aubrey. Yeah. And my favorite Disney movie came out in 2002, and that's Lilo and Stitch. So I think 2002 was an interesting year for pop culture, and it was a good one, and there was a lot of stuff happening. So
great.
Interesting. Caroline?
I'm sticking with 1913. You know,
that's right, yes.
You know that I think we should do this. I'm on board. I would love to throw my support behind like 1984. I think that's coming out with the Wonder Woman movie that's coming out. There's going to be a lot to look at there, but my heart belongs to 1913.
We will crack open that time capsule at one point. Mine's just kind of echoing what Cassidy said. I would actually go with 1989. I was 10 years old at the time. That year, I remember the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was kind of the end of the Cold War. Lots of great 80s pop culture happening around there, kind of transitioning to the 90s. So I think we could have a lot of fun with that episode.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I have had so much fun reliving some of my memories and learning about new stuff from a year I thought I knew. Cassidy, is there anything coming up at the Strathcona branch that people should check out?
Yeah, so I want to share something pretty unique that we are doing, which is called Secret City Old Strathcona. So this is created by Phenomania Productions. And was part of the Found Festival this past summer. And it's essentially a walking tour audio performance. And it's all around sort of the secrets of our city. It's a living library of people's memories around Old Strathcona. So it's a collection of 5 personal memories tied to very specific physical locations in the Old Strathcona area. The memories are then created or turned into performances, audio performances that were then created by local artists. Some of the local artists are the actual memory holders, and some of them are from anonymous memory holders. And so you can actually go to our website, and we have it as an event listed for Secret City. And it's not an event that has sort of an end time, but there's a link there, and you go to the Secret City website, and there's a bunch of audio clips that you can listen to. Ideally, you will go on a little walk and listen to them where they happen, but we also recognize that it could be a little chilly right now, so you can do it from the comfort of your home. If for some reason you don't have a device to listen on or you don't have a way to stream them, we're trying to make this as accessible as possible. So we have MP3 player devices you can borrow from the Strathcona branch, as well as headsets of the library, and we also have little maps there that you can pick up to go on a little walking tour. So it's just under 2 kilometers walking, about 50 minutes of audio performances, and it has some really cool names like Darren Hagen, a previous writer in residence of ours, shared a memory of the old Strathcona area and produced and performed it. Mac Brock, Nisha Patel are some of the artists. So I think it's a lovely little, I like the idea of it being a living library of memory around Old Strathcona, and I'm really excited that we have this. Like I said, there's no end date to this, so hopefully we'll have it when spring comes and it's nicer to take a walking tour, but it's available at any time, and I hope that everyone will check it out.
And we'll have a link to that in our show notes as well, so definitely encourage everyone to go check that out. Carol, I know we touched on it very briefly at the beginning, but obviously you work in our collection management and access division here at EPL. And is there anything you want people, I guess, to know about that they should be aware of?
So this is something that doesn't just affect EPL. This is affecting all libraries all over North America, and something that our library world is very aware of, but maybe our library customers don't know about. So one of the largest publishers in North America, so Macmillan Publishers, they recently implemented an embargo on ebooks for libraries. And this means that all of their new releases as of November 1st, 2019, libraries can only purchase one ebook copy for the first 8 weeks. And this means longer wait times for our library customers. It's not great. Macmillan is doing this in hopes that these longer wait times will push ebook borrowers to become ebook buyers. And this is really bad for libraries because it hinders our goal, our goal of equitable access for everyone. And it just makes things a lot more difficult for us. People are complaining. People are, wondering why we only have one copy of a book when there's 200 holds on it. So if you really want to learn more, please visit ebooksforall.org. There's a petition there started by the American Library Association, so you can sign it and just show solidarity that, libraries are trying to do their best, and it's hard to work with publishers that are punishing libraries.
Yeah, we'll have a link to that as well. And it's so important to libraries and just obviously allowing everybody to have equal access to some of these newer releases and popular titles. So please go online. If you can and support it, definitely sign the petition, and it's a great cause.
We hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you automatically get new episodes as they're released. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We love getting reviews. And as always, if you like what you've heard, please tell a friend about the show.
Yeah, and don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. If you want to share your memories of the year 2000 or suggest a future pop culture time capsule year, email us at podcast@epl.ca or hit us up on Twitter by using the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.